What do you think, what kind of a job do you think Jody Weis is doing now? I know that you've had a sit down with him from his earliest moments in the position. He may have, I know he's learned a few things, the Chicago way of doing things, and what do you think?
I think right now at best you could call it a mixed bag. Mm-hmm. He's attempted to put some reforms in, some more professionalization. However, at the same time, a year ago, April 16th, he okayed or authorized the arming of beat officers with M4 assault rifles.
Right. I think we had you on the program at that time.
Right. So it's a
mixed bag.
It's a total mixed bag.
Yeah. What was the rate at which the board produced unanimous decisions? This is always a telling thing.
This is a big issue because for civilian employees, it was 85% of the time. For sworn officers, it's only 58. And while that doesn't, first of all, it sounds like it's a large discrepancy, and it is. But the reason it's really important is because their decisions currently, or since they've been around since the early 1960s, their decisions don't have explanations for how they've reached them. So there's no way to learn from the community, well, you held a hearing, witnesses didn't show up, or there was no evidence provided. There's all kinds of possibilities why they only suspended them and overturned it, but we don't know. So you can see from that number, at least 40% of the time in sworn officers' cases, there is some sort of disagreement among the board what the discipline should be or what the outcome should be.
How do people get named to this board?
Well, it hasn't happened in a long time.
So they've all been there for a while.
Yeah, and by ordinance, they're submitted by the mayor. They're picked by the mayor and then confirmed by the city council. The last Victor Gonzalez was the last member to join. That was February of 2000, and at least one, I think, Arthur Smith, I've been told, was on 20 years.
Wow.
So, and another interesting thing is we just recently learned, right before we published our report, that they're actually getting paid.
Yeah, this blew my mind, reading the report. These guys that serve on the Chicago Police Board, now some of whom are there 20 years, no one is there less than 9 years at this point. They do not follow the recommendations of the the superintendent. They do not punish police officers, some as bad as the one you mentioned, and we pay them to do this.
Yes, and it's interesting. They instituted a what they call a stipend to the members back in 1999. Oddly enough, right when our report started, and it started out at $15,000 a year for the president and $10,000 for the members. And in 2008, it increased to $25,000 a year for the president and $15,000 for the members. Now,
excuse me while I gag. I mean, really.
Well, if you match that with, and we're not taking a position on whether they should or shouldn't get paid. That's an issue, right? That's an issue separate from us. But if you compare that with the rate at which they're returning officers to duty without explanations, and then you also compare that to 4 members of the police board over the decade that we studied missed at least 20% of the votes. Of those 4, 3 were close to 30%, and 1 was actually over 34% of the votes missed, but still was collecting a stipend of $15,000 a year.
Wow. So you got a little press on this week, I noticed. Channel 7 did?
Yeah, Channel 7, Channel 5. Actually, it's quite a bit. The Trib, the Sun-Times. There's definitely, we did a bunch of pre-briefings with even the mayor's lawyer, Mara George, many aldermen, the superintendent, the head of the Independent Police Review Authority, the head of Internal Affairs. And in that chorus, there was pretty much and a whole bunch of aldermen, there was pretty much a consensus that new legislation is needed in quick order. And it's also going to include many, if not all, of the recommendations we have put forth in our report about transparency, written decisions, and the fact that they should not be really allowed to miss more than 10% of the votes in any one term, which is 5 years.
Heck, we don't even let our park advisory board officers miss more than 2 meetings in a row.
Right, and so...
and we're not paid.
Whoever, whether it's a civilian employee, a sworn officer, the citizens, policymakers, everyone deserves an engaged board.
Yes.
The officers who are accused, I'm sure sometimes, occasionally, falsely, or something happened wrong, they need engaged board. They don't need 4 members missed. Odds are they're going to miss a vote.
Right.
Right.
How big is the board again?
It's 9 members made up of 5 lawyers, a dentist, pastor of a church, but I guess it's a very large church, and he's just opened his second church. Phyllis Applebaum, who missed the most votes at 34%. She's the founder and CEO of Arrow Messaging. So you have some very, for the most part, empowered and well-to-do people on this board.
Yeah, they need taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting. I went around to aldermen and asked them, how many people in your community would consider $15,000 a year or $25,000 a year a stipend?
Yeah, right. I consider it my payroll. Thank you, Heartland Cafe.
Well, I consider it my payroll, too, as running a small nonprofit.
Right. Holy smokers. So what do you think, I don't know exactly, what would you say would be the most heinous or lack of service result from the police board, as well as then the possibility, the opening for changing it for the better, or making it actually useful to the taxpayers who are supporting it?
I got to say, one of the things that I was really put off with, both in the response from the police board, but to some degree, the media coverage, is the president of the police board, Demetrius Carney, who's been president the whole 10 years, kept saying to the media that, well, this is a problem with how they present cases. They're not presenting their cases right. We have to rely on the facts in front of us. They're not proving the cases. They're not proving the cases. When in reality, that may be true in some of the cases, but in the more egregious ones, even in the limited decisions they produce, you can see that, like in Cozy, they found him guilty of almost every charge. There's another case where an officer was drunk off duty. That's a rule violation. He had his gun unsecured in his car. That's another rule violation. He fired his gun while off duty while drunk. He fired it into a crowd while off duty and drunk, and then he filed false reports about it. They found him guilty of all of that except for purposely firing into a crowd. But all of that is worthy of dismissal on its independent own, especially lying, filing false reports.
Right.
They found him guilty of everything. They didn't need to prove the case, but they just overturned the decision.
All right. What?
Well, the reason you're responding the way you are, and the same thing the alderman did yesterday in the police board's budget hearings, was with that same reaction they got from the executive director. Yes, very much. Well, they were actually quite unhappy.
Appalled.
And I have one other thing to tell you about that, but they were like, please give us written decisions, because we're not going to trust you telling us they didn't prove their case. We want you to prove to us they didn't prove their case. And that's fine. Then we'll get on them to prove their case.
Sure.
But one other astounding thing that came out of yesterday's budget hearings, the police board was in front of the budget committee of the city council, is by ordinance, they have the statutory responsibility to approve and to submit the Chicago Police Department's budget. All right? No one, it's kind of an obscure little part of their ordinance. Well, we didn't know if they did it. In our pre-briefings, people said, we don't know if they do that or not. So Brendan Riley asked the executive director, Max Caproni, from the Chicago Police Board, hey, what process do you use? He's like, I don't know. I can't tell you. And he's like, okay, can you please provide us copies immediately of the documents you submit to do that? He goes, well, I can't. Now, he's only been there 5 years, right? He goes, I can't. And Brendan Riley goes, why? He goes, because in my 5 years, we've never done it. And then Brendan O'Reilly gets upset and he goes, I want it on the record in the transcripts. You are saying that in the 5 years you've been executive director, all 5 years you have been in violation of the ordinance to approve and submit the budget knowingly. And he's like, yes.
Whoa.
And that was like a stunner. Like, I don't even know if they have the capacity to do it, but the fact that they wouldn't take that up and amend the ordinance or do something, they just let it go and openly were in violation of the law.